Okay, so I got it out. I only have one ring on the piston exposed. There's a little bit of carbon buildup on the top here and here, which will get cleaned up. But with that pushed out of the way, I didn't have to take the other head off, and with no damage on this cylinder, on this jug or this piston, I'm not taking the other one off. There's no reason for it. And I was able to work out my crankshaft. Now, the piece in question, or the part in question, I don't know if you can see that. What I'm concerned about here, or what our issue was, I should say, was any damage to the crank here. And I see some lines, I see some normal, almost normal wear and tear, but I don't feel any real deep grooves or anything along those lines. Not enough to worry about the crank itself. I think the crank is just fine. Now, the reason that we pulled this out, if I can now get this seal out real quick. Nothing goes quick, but getting the seal out is what I'm looking to do. And I'm not worried about damaging it because I have a replacement. And of course it doesn't want to come out. But in here is a bushing. And I can feel, yeah, I can definitely feel there's scoring in there. Sorry again, it's difficult to film and show you guys everything. But you can definitely see and feel there's a ton of scoring. There's actually a groove in there, which is funny because there's no groove on the crank itself. I couldn't feel any grooves that were deep enough to worry about. You can see this line here. You can see, lines going around it. But I don't think there's going to be an issue with the crank. But there's definitely an issue with this press bearing. I keep calling it bearing. It's a bushing. I wrote the word on the wall so that as I stand here, only having said it for 100 times in the last few days, I keep forgetting that it's called a bushing, so I wrote it on the wall. It's not a bearing, it's a bushing. And this bushing goes right in there. Obviously this oil ring comes out, and I have to get my press tool and I have to press the old one out and put the new one in, and that will take care of any wobble. Okay, now I can feel already there's supposed to be the slightest, like not even a human hair, just a tiny bit of space between this bushing and your crank. And the reason for that is, as this thing throws oil up, it splashes oil throughout the entire thing. They actually want you to get oil between this bushing, which is mounted inside your case, and your crankshaft. So there should be just, I can barely feel it moving, just the slightest bit of movement. And that way there's always a space for oil to get sucked up in there and make sure that this stays lubricated. And what happened, obviously, she's got enough hours on this thing. I want to say there's 700 or 800 hours on it. And that's just from her using it on her own property. A motor like this should get about 2,000 hours. That's what you can expect out of a motor like this. So we're not quite halfway there. And she would not have had an issue with this had the oil not exploded. And that's what's behind door number 1 here, which I'll show you later in the video. But if I run my finger around inside of there, I can feel grooves. I can feel that is just horrible. And I wish that I could let you feel it, considering that the new bearing is smooth and ready to go. There's actually a channel that runs right up the center. It goes around and it's dead center, and that's so that the oil can get up there, fill that up, and stay lubricated. And I can feel that channel from about 12 o'clock to about 4 o'clock, from about here to here, and the rest of it is all worn off. That's how bad this one is. So yeah, I'll try and show it to you on camera when I get it pressed out. I got to get out this oil seal, then I got to get my press tool. I got to press that out. But there's our problem. Or as Adam Savage would say, there's your problem. And that's a beautiful, 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 beautiful thing to behold, because I thought that this engine was going to be a paperweight, and instead of it being a paperweight, it is completely salvageable. We're talking about, if I want to be honest and you want to have an idea of what it's going to cost, this is 2022, so prices are going up. So far, I had to buy the upper and lower seal. That's this black ring. I had to buy the upper and lower seal. I bought the case gasket, which goes in between the two pieces of the case, and I bought this bushing. And so far, that's all I bought, and that was 25 bucks, $24. Now that I've taken off at least one head, I'm going to take off the other head, and I'm going to replace, actually that doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to replace the head gaskets. You can figure those are about 10 bucks a piece. So 25 becomes 35, becomes 45, and then I'll see about gaskets for the valve covers, but honestly you can just use some Permatex for that, which I may do. And then there's a kit. When I take off door number 1 here, and I'll show you that in a minute, there's a kit that goes, it's a gasket, and there's a filter in there, and you have to clean the check valve. But I think when I talked to the guys at the parts house, it was like 17 bucks for the kit. So I'll have to do that. So I'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 bucks total with Permatex and, you know, cleaner and stuff. I'll have 80 bucks into rebuilding this thing, and it should get another 1,000 hours, 1,500 hours. I mean, it'll be a brand new motor. I honestly don't see any problems inside the jug. I'm very, very happy. I'm sorry I'm rambling on, but I am extremely happy that this motor did not get damaged. Honestly, beyond fixing. And if it weren't for this bushing having worn out, oil was finding its way. It was getting clogged in here, finding its way out of the gasket that's under here, which is why the entire front of the machine, you can see all that dried oil. This was behind the carburetor, and it blew out the gasket here, and it was just running down like a curtain. And then obviously with that being worn out, it was wobbling, and it was letting the oil come out the top as well. So we caught it in time that it didn't do any damage to the motor at all. And now we're gonna pull this press out. I'm gonna pull this plate off and show you what's underneath of that. And we are gonna start putting this thing back together, which will be a different video. I may take some emery cloth to that just to clean it up just a tad, but I can't even feel, even with my fingernail, I can't feel anything. You know, when you run your fingernail across something, you could tell if it's smooth or if it's catching on something. I can't feel anything with my fingernail, so I probably won't even touch that. So let me get out this oil seal, and let me get this off, and then I'll show you that. Now, before I started the camera, I pulled out my oil seal here, and I can get a real clear look at all the scoring and garbage that's going on inside, all the wear that's on that. Very happy. And then I went to loosen up these bolts so I could take this off easily for you, and 2 of them were already loose. That's a high pressure oil, so that's definitely blown out. And it happens, the filter gets clogged. This is your oil filter, a secondary system. This is a high pressure machine, so it builds up pressure, and then it uses this to take away the pressure. I'll show you in a second. And there's a filter in there, and if that filter gets clogged, and there's, see the gasket here. Now, this kit that I'm talking about, yeah, that's all screwed completely. The kit that I'm talking about comes with a new lid. This plate comes with a new gasket, and it comes with this. And this is completely hard and shot. I hate the feeling of this on my fingers. There wasn't anything passing through there. So what happened was, this thing built up pressure. Right here, it built up pressure, and this got clogged. This filter here got clogged, which fits in like so. And there's a check valve in there, I believe down in here. And you just have to make sure that all this is cleaned up. So the oil comes out, it comes through here, it goes into this chamber. Yeah, this is the top of the motor. So it comes out here, it fills this up through this channel on both sides, and it filters it before it sends it back in case there's any metal shavings or anything inside. But this is high pressure. So what happened when this gasket went to shit and this was loose, it was just blowing oil. This is a part that never got pressure washed because the carburetor was in the way. That's all dry old oil. So this is all going to get completely cleaned up again, obviously before I put it back together. But that was because the oil was just flooding out and down and then across the deck. So it was coming out here, it was getting all up here. This is why this is all black and filled in with oil. It was just coming out and going everywhere. And then it was coming out of here as well. And let me see if I can get you closer to that. See if you can see that. You see all that scoring? You see how bad that is? See if I can, sorry if you're getting dizzy. See how bad that is? I mean, that's just shot to shit. That's what our problem was. Why we had crank wobble. And you can see with that much damage on this thing, okay, and you can see there, see the black line about the center of the camera, where it's worn more on one side than it is on the other. That is this bearing bushing. That's what this is. And I've got to press this out. You see that it's level right there at the top. That's where my fingernail is. So I've got to get my bearing press, which is basically a big chisel with the proper fitting on the end of it. And it's going to push that bearing, that bushing. Where the hell am I? It's going to push that bushing out. And I'm just going to drive it right out of the case. And then I'm going to put some oil on this one. And we're going to fit it back in. And we're going to drive it down where it's supposed to be. And that takes care of our crank wobble. And that takes care of our oil leak there. That takes care of the oil leak there. And we're going to put this thing back together and go for a ride tomorrow. Cut some grass. Okay, I don't know if you can see in there. I have 3 lights set up within a few inches. But I wanted to show you. This is the jug. And it is clean. Now I'm putting new rings on just because, but there is no wear inside of there. The other thing I wanted to show you real quick was that I did in fact get the old bearing out, or the old bushing I should say. And I got it out. It was not easy. I did not film it. I tried using various things. I even went to the store to look for a bushing removal kit, and the tips weren't large enough for this. So what I ended up doing was using a hacksaw. Okay, I used a hacksaw. And I cut a little and I pushed a little with the screwdriver as a punch, and then cut a little and pushed a little until I got about 1/3 of the way there. And then I was able to tap it, and it finally came out with no damage at all. Now, let's just go outside here. I want to show you in the light what the inside of this bearing really looks like. Now, obviously, not the damage that I did, but look behind there. Look at all the wear on that bearing. I mean, that thing was just toast. And when I put it up to the new one, the thickness was half of the thickness of the new one. So this wall here between my fingers was half the thickness of the new one. It is so completely worn out that it was just garbage. And now that I have the new one in, and what I did there was, in order to get it in, getting it out was no problem. As far as I wasn't worried if I damaged the case at all with a chisel, because the bearing or the bushing slides into the case. So as long as the rim of the bushing and the inside of the bushing are good, it takes up any kind of scratch marks or anything that you may put on the case when you're trying to get the old one out. Now, I still have not taken any emery cloth to this, but now it's so tight I still need to take a little bit of emery cloth to this, just because it's a little bit tight right there. But once it gets past that point, it slides right in. The bushing, the new bushing is in place here. And what I did was I tapped it from the opposite side like this. And there's a ring here and a lip inside. So I put the bushing in place where it was supposed to go. Then I used a washer that was, the bushing was dead center in this washer. So I put that on top, and then I used a socket to make sure that it wasn't going to slip off and screw up the edge. And I just beat it on, bow, 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 nice and solid and steady. And because it goes flush right there at the top, the washer was wider than the bearing. It was smaller than the circumference inside and larger outside. So I knew when that went flat and it stopped moving, I knew I was flush. Boom. So that's how I reinstalled it. And it was a hell of a lot easier getting it in than it was getting it out. And of course I put a little bit of lube on both sides, inside and outside of the new bushing. And that's it. The only reason I'm not beginning to put this thing back together just yet is because it's about time to get a complete cleaning. So I'm going to take it outside and I am going to clean the living crap out of this thing. Both sides of the case, everything else. I ended up taking both heads off. If I'm going to rebuild it and sell this machine as a commercial with a brand new rebuilt motor, it's getting new head gaskets, new rings on the pistons, the whole 9 yards. But this thing is in pristine condition, with the exception of the top oil leak through that gasket I showed you where the filter was, and that bushing being worn, and that's just from use. Those things are tempered steel. I tried cutting it with a hacksaw, and it was like scraping your fingernails over a rock. It just didn't do much of nothing. So it was pretty worn, but that was the problem. By the time you see this, I'll be just putting it together, probably in super speed mode.